There are, of course, people who make good money out of wokeism, and they've got a financial incentive in keeping it going. One example from here, just staying on sport, there's no reason at all why you would have heard of the Manly Sea Eagles in England. They're a rugby league team based on the northern beaches of Sydney. Now, last week there was a notorious incident, you may have seen it publicised even in Britain, where the idea came up that they'd all wear pride jerseys, rainbow jerseys for this special round, and the jerseys were issued and whatever. The problem was they didn't actually tell the players, and 7 of the players, now known as the Manly Seven, were good Christian folk from the Pacific Islands, and said, we're not wearing them, we'd rather not play. The whole thing backfired, but for me, you know, the most telling thing about that case is when somebody asked, well, who came up with the idea of this in the first place? It was the company that makes the team's jerseys. They just saw a marketing opportunity in making a whole new strip for this special Pride round, and indeed they did, and they sold loads of copies. I mean, this is just cynical, isn't it? I mean, when the naked profit motive becomes so obvious.
Well, I think you're right. It is cynical, and there are lots and lots of people making money out of this, but it goes even more deeply, I think, than the obvious examples. I mean, Ben & Jerry's ice cream is well known for its politicising, how it's quite possible to politicise cream and sugar to quite the extent that they do. I mean, truly beggars belief. But I think that's really just the tip of the iceberg. If you look at every major corporation, and even not so major corporation now, they employ layers and layers of diversity officers. I mean, universities do this to the nth degree. They're practically more equality, diversity, inclusivity officers than there are academics actually teaching students. And you create these layers of people whose actual job and income is premised upon the fact of there being racism, sexism, transphobia in the workplace. So they're not incentivized to actually solve problems that might arise, because as soon as they turn around and say, well, actually, do you know what, we don't think there is racism in this university, we think everyone gets along really well, and black students are doing just as well as white students, then they're out of a job, and clearly that's not in their best interest. So instead what they have to do is perpetuate the cycle and look for ever smaller, ever more insignificant instances of racism, etc., to justify their own salary, justify their own position. And obviously what that does is it creates this kind of grievance culture. It creates this sense of white people being oppressors, black people being victims. It sows division, it sows dissent amongst people. It's really, really problematic. But so many people have got a financial stake in making sure that this continues.
And you make a point. I mean, it really is a sort of make-work scheme, if you like, for people with hopeless degrees, isn't it? And so there is a sense in which they need to be employed somewhere, and they're employed in these jobs, particularly often by, you know, government-run organisations where taxpayers pay the money for these diversity and inclusion officers, etc.